Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back on into the Blue Collar Psychiatrist. Today we're going to talk about sitting on a bench in the zoo to overcome shyness. Does that sound bizarre to you? Certainly does to me. But the story is true. The name of the individual who did this was Albert Ellis. Ellis was one of the founders of behavioral psychotherapy, one of the pioneers. He was a psychologist, had a PhD in psychology. But he had a problem in his younger years, in adolescence. He was deathly afraid of talking to women. He wanted to date women, he wanted to get to know women, but he was so petrified by the very thought of walking up to a woman and saying hello and introducing himself that he was in a secluded area in his mind that he simply could not break. But he came up with an idea, a practical solution to this problem. Here was his plan. He would go to the Bronx Zoological Gardens in New York and sit on a bench. He vowed to himself that he would say hello to every woman who passed by, unless she had on a ring on her fourth finger indicating that she was married. He didn't care. And this is the main point of this. He did not care whether the woman said anything back to him. He did not really care whether he got a date with a woman whom he approached verbally. His goal was simply to open his mouth and talk to a woman. And that is exactly what he did. After a month, or perhaps a little bit more, he began to notice that it was easier to walk up to a woman and start a conversation. In other words, he desensitized himself from his own shyness of talking to females. As time went on, believe it or not, he became known as one of the greatest playboys in New York City after a beginning of shyness. He became known as one of the fathers of behavioral psychotherapy. I believe he called it rational emotive therapy. But this is the key. You must, and I'm talking to the men out there, you must desensitize yourself from the fear of talking to women. You have to continuously do this, no matter how silly you might think you sound. Because the idea here is to break that self-imposed barrier and walk up to a woman and say hello. And if something beyond that comes about, so much the better. But you cannot attach success to whether or not the woman responds to you. Your success and Albert Ellis's success was simply to say hello to a woman. And if he could do that, he would consider himself successful. He later utilized these therapies. Actually, he was one of the fathers of behavioral psychotherapy, and he later used that in his own practice of psychology with his patients. But ladies and gentlemen, this is something that the average person, the average man, the average guy out there can do. You don't need 1,000 hours of psychotherapy, although some psychotherapy may help. That is behavioral psychotherapy. But the idea is to break that wall down, the wall of fear, so that you're able to function in the world. Otherwise, you're going to lead a life of loneliness, of self-pity, of feeling horrible about yourself because you can't meet a woman. But remember this, success is not dependent on the woman's response. Success is defined as being able to say hello and thereby breaking the barrier of actually introducing yourself to a woman, of saying something to a woman. Albert Ellis, one of the true characters, and that's what he was. He was also a showman later in his life. Albert Ellis, one of the greatest and most practical psychotherapists in the history of mental health treatment. Ladies and gentlemen, I remind you to drink and drink abundantly from the fountain of life. See you next time.